AP Human Geographers. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we can see here with this practice question. What we're going to use in this method is something a little bit more specific. This time we're going to use the scan, connect, answer method. Now, the big thing with this scan, connect, and answer method, or the SCA, is what we want to focus on. The scan, it's really three parts, and we'll start with the scan. What we want to do is be spending about 15-20 seconds. As we know, we only get 60 seconds a piece on average when we're looking at these MCQ type questions. We want to spend that time efficiently. So we want to take about half of that time, or a little bit less, examining what's going on. I want to read the stem of the question. I want to look at the stimulus that's there. In this case, it's a map. And what we want to look for is kind of any specific titles, labels, locations, or any obvious patterns. So when we look at this, we really want to focus on what's going on in that question. Here we can see a picture of China. We see some labeled prefectures or states, if you will, within inside of the country of China. We also see that there's a map key going on. So we can see some sort of correlation that's going along with those two. And we know that there's going to be something most likely going on with some sort of manufacturing in the question. Now, here comes the second part. The second part is the connect. The connect is really important. What we want to do here is we want to read the STEM question. So let's do that. In this particular example, in this practice question, we see that we have the stimulus, and then we have our question just below that. And the question reads as this: the pattern shown on the map best illustrates which of the following geographic concepts. So we got to figure out what's actually being put on the map. What we see in this area is we see that all of these symbols are in certain areas of the country, and we see it in not other spaces as well. It doesn't necessarily matter what type of things these symbols represent. We just know that they're in the what we would refer to as the eastern portion of China. And the real big question that we need to ask ourselves after we've looked at the image, we've read the stem, is we got to ask ourselves this own question: which part of the stimulus is this question pointing me towards? So what am I looking at? We got to draw some sort of maybe a mental map or even a literal line if we need to between the stimulus detail and the question. So we're looking for geographic concepts in this space. So it might be distribution, but based off of these areas down here in our choices, we want to go ahead and try and get our best answer. And when we look at this, we want to use the A portion of the scan, connect, and answer, and the A stands just for that, an answer. We want to use that connection to try and eliminate choices like we did in our last example, to ignore that stimulus context. The best answer will oftentimes be the one that uses the stimulus most directly. In this case, remember that stimulus, friends, is that map and the map key and what's being displayed. So let's look at this here. Our options, we've got A through E, which is exactly what we're going to see on the AP test. Letter A shows backwash effect from core regions. Core regions, we see that maybe politically we might see some different shapes. We don't have a lot of information there because we're talking about different types of manufacturing going through here. Letter B is the bid rent theory in urban areas. We could maybe make that connection, but we don't see anything specific with an urban area or urbanization in this particular map. Letter C is talking about exporting processing or export processing zones and special economic zones, or SEZs. And what we see here is, well, we definitely are looking at different products. However, if we look a little bit closer, we can see that there's some different shaded colors. Now, each one of those colors has a different title when we look at these. So that's something that's a possibility. Letter D, the gravity model of migration. We don't see any migration being demonstrated on this, especially in regards to the map key. And then lastly, letter E, primate city distribution. Going through here, we have no labeled cities. We have labeled areas, inside of these different political boundaries. However, we don't see any city labeling there. If we were to look for those kinds of things, we would see Beijing here in the northern portions. We would see Guangzhou down in the southern portion, Taiwan. We just don't see those being labeled here. So really the only connection that we can make is with letter C. And in this case, that is the correct answer. Letter C is the right answer because we see the export processing zones and the special economic zones being directly described in deliberate placement of manufacturing in coastal China. What we see as a result of that is the other options just don't match what we observed in the spatial pattern that's there. So the connection we want to make is that the stimulus shows deliberate industrial zones near the coast. If you're going back and thinking back to what we can maybe pull a little bit more information on, this is Unit 7. It's not political geography. This is talking about the industrial and economic development, as well as those spatial concepts from Unit 1 and 2. So hopefully this helps, and good luck on that AP test, geographers.